Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions. Here we go.
Hi, everyone, listeners from all over the world, wherever you're coming from. Welcome to the So Emotional podcast. This is where we remove the stigma and enigma around the emotional journey. We get in there deep and talk about emotions. I'm your host, Angela Wetzel. I am a trauma-informed coach and founder of Epic Initiator Coaching. This is your other host, Nick Carl. He is a somatic coach from the Safe Anchor, and we have a very special guest. All of our guests are special. I'm super, super excited to get to talk to Xochitl Ashe today. She is one of my friends that I met pre-pandemic, another world ago, and she's an incredible human, and it's been such a pleasure to know her and also get to watch her journey over the past 4 years. So I'm going to read her entire bio here because she's completely badass and y'all should know who she is. So I'm going to attempt her middle name as well. Xochitl Ashe has been a teacher and guide in one-on-one mentorships, workshops, and ceremonies, both in the US and internationally for the last 27 years. Holy shit. At 16 years old, she became the first female of 5 generations of men to be initiated into the healing traditions of her Peruvian ancestral lineage. She is a medicine woman in the Peruvian Andean tradition and has worked with sacred plant medicine since the time of her initiation. For the past 23 years, she apprenticed under her godfather, a Mazatec medicine man of the ancient tradition of healing with the, I want to say, is it Nitsito?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Santitos or psilocybin mushrooms. She is a professionally trained herbalist, IFS therapy practitioner, as we all know, or most of us. And if you don't, it's internal family systems and specializes in the ceremonial use of cacao and psilocybin mushrooms. In her practice, Xochitl focuses on the healing of generational trauma and the ways in which trauma impairs our ability to thrive, create wealth, and have positive impact on the world. Founder of the Magical Medicine Journeys, an indigenous women-owned retreat company that offers legal Mazatec psilocybin mushroom retreats in Mexico, Xochitl's mission is to honor the traditional indigenous knowledge and ceremony of sacred plant medicine and provide the most authentic and powerful life-changing experience. She is faculty at Esalen Institute, the Microdosing Institute, and the Shift Network, and she has a new podcast called Sacred Psychedelics, available on Apple and Spotify. So if you do not know this woman, I definitely recommend diving in. Her website, we're gonna drop all of her social stuff and website thing. And at the end, she will tell us more about some of her offerings, since she does have some medicine journeys coming up. Welcome.
I am so happy to be here with both of you.
Yeah, we are very, very happy to have you. So to start out, since this is the So Emotional podcast, and like one of our goals here is to really help people that are navigating the emotional journey kind of hear it from different people, just like how you kind of realized emotions were something important to pay attention to, or what your own journey was just in maybe getting to where you are today. And so just some version of that question.
Yeah, that's such a big and broad question and an important question. I was just trying to think, like, when was the first time that I think that when we notice emotions the most is when we notice that emotions are actually controlling some part of ourselves that like we don't like, right? Like, oh,
Kicking
I'm
our
too
ass.
right. Like they're kicking our ass, like, oh, I'm too
Oh yeah.
sensitive. Or somebody will say something like, why are you making such a big deal?
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Or you find yourself being depressed or sad or too angry. So for me, like the first time I was very conscious of my emotions was when I think I was around like 5 or 6, and I was watching some movie, and the horse in the movie fell and like died. Because like for some reason in movies when horses fall and they like break their ankle, it's like you have to kill them.
Mhm.
And then I remember like I was just so sad that I couldn't stop crying and I couldn't stop crying. And like I remember my mom being like, "What are you crying about? Like it's just a movie." And I started noticing how like it wasn't normal, right? It wasn't normal for other people to cry so much when they would see an animal, right? Exactly.
Yeah, I'm doing air quotes. I'm like
Yes.
normal to cry.
And so I realized I mean, at that time there wasn't a lot of information about being highly sensitive. Um,
Mhm.
and I grew up with like a very tough mom, who of course, right, like was very traumatized herself, and a father that was taught that like it wasn't manly to show your emotions. So even though we are supporting people, right, like as medicine people to heal for whatever reason, there's still um like the effects of colonialism, like men, like the patriarchy, like men must be this way, men must act this way. And so yeah, my dad was very tough, even though he was also highly sensitive. That's really the secret, right? Like that a lot of what I've noticed through my work is that those people that act the toughest are the ones that are the most sensitive. They just don't see that as a superpower yet. And so it took me a long time. I think, and this is related to my journey with entheogens and plant medicine, because it wasn't until I was 16 that, of course, I'm a teenager. I think I had just gone through my first breakup and I was a complete mess. And of course, later on, I was to find out that, I had some codependent tendencies and that I had no idea, right? Like I didn't even know what codependency was. But at this time, um, I was just a total mess, and my dad just didn't know what to do with me. This is my parents were divorced, and so he had been working with a specific plant medicine, and he was seeing so many results in people's healings that he was like, "Xochitl, I have the solution." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "We have to do a ceremony, with this plant medicine." And the only reason why I'm not talking about this specific plant medicine is because I'm not
Mhm.
sure if, you know, it wasn't mushrooms. It was a different, it was peyote. And, and I was like, why can't just be like a normal dad? Like, why are you like saying that we have to do a ceremony? Like, I was just so annoyed, like a 16-year-old. Like, plant medicine wasn't on Instagram. There was no Instagram, right? Like this was very much underground. Um, and you would I wasn't hearing because I was growing up between Mexico and the US. I wasn't hearing other 16-year-olds where their parents were like, we have to do a ceremony with some plant medicine, right? And I was so annoyed and I was like, no, I don't want to do it. But the pain was so much. Like, I mean, right now I feel like my sensitivity is my superpower because I've worked on it. I've understood it. It gives me the ability to be a seer, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But back then it was just debilitating. It was just like it was overwhelming on my system. And my dad didn't know what to do. So the pain got so bad that I had to be like, okay, dad, fine, let's do a ceremony, right? Like it just got so bad that like there was no other solution that I was being offered. And I love my dad, right? And as much as I thought like, God, I wish you could be like a normal dad, at the same time, my dad was quite magical, right? And I really admired him and so I trusted him. once I let go of that whole thing of like, this is not what normal kids, 16-year-olds do, right?
And
And so,
you had a kind of a knowledge about what he did in ceremonies
yeah.
for a while.
Um, yeah, I hadn't been in a ceremony myself. So I
Sure.
knew that he worked with people like doing limpias, like spiritual cleansings, and like he was also a therapist simultaneously. So, he would do like counsel and things like that. But I'd never up, been to a medicine ceremony yet with him. So I didn't quite know what I was going to experience. It was very, you know,
Yeah, but
the
you're up
un
against it and kind of going crazy, right?
oh, totally. And it's the
Yeah.
unknown, right? But it's like, okay, what else? This pain is too overwhelming. What am I gonna do? So yeah, we did a ceremony. That was my first initiation into being a medicine woman. And that ceremony shifted everything. It shifted my life. It shifted how I saw the world. It shifted also, it gave me an understanding of my emotions, of the power of my emotions. I was able to see them. I was able to see how my emotions would take form. One of the ways that we heal when we do medicine ceremonies is that some people are able to see their emotions take form. And sometimes you see like the sadness, and it's this being that's just like dragging itself, and then you're able to talk to it, you're able to work with it. And that's actually why I was so attracted to studying and being a practitioner of IFS, because I've always studied psychology. I did a 2-year program on family therapy, but none of it really like did it for me. You know, I was about to go into a therapy program, and I actually had at that time 3 clients that were therapists themselves. um and they told me like, don't do it. And I was like, why? And they're like, because you won't be able to do what you do, like you'll be restricted by like the system. And I was like, okay. But IFS, when I discovered IFS, I was like, oh, this is what we do in medicine ceremonies. We're able to see the different arts that are at play, right? So in many ways, at that age, at 16, I was able to see some of my parts like visually, and I was able to see how they affected me, and I was able also to see like what fed them, right? At that time, growing up in San Francisco, being in high school, everybody smoked cannabis. People were experimenting with all kinds of psychedelics and like pretty heavy drugs. Like San Francisco was a city where, as a young person, you could get anything you wanted, and it was easy, and sometimes it was even free. And so I remember after that ceremony, I went sober. I was like, the medicine just was so clear. It was like, you cannot drink, you cannot smoke. And I didn't smoke until I got another message when I was 23. But from 16 to 23, imagine that. I did not smoke or drink. I mean, I still don't drink, but it was profound, that ceremony. And that was really like the beginning of my journey, like, because I think, I was always very aware that something was wrong with me, right? um that I was extra sensitive. And then at 16 I realized like, yeah, I'm extra sensitive, but I also, there's something in this, like, because I was also, I didn't I didn't just tap into like seeing these emotions and their personalities and how they affected me. I also tapped into something else. I tapped into like, oh, wow, I can talk to plants and I can hear them. Like I tapped into some what would be considered like magical skills because of my sensitivity. And that's when I first noticed like, oh wow, okay, so these emotions, they're not all bad. Like they they can also give you gifts if you know how to work with them. So, yeah, I know that
So,
was a lot, but I wanted to just kind of give you guys a little bit of like,
so you're
my journey.
16 and you're up against it. And I can kind of that character and that feeling, I can very much empathize with. It reminded me of something. This was probably 5 years ago. I was going through some stuff, but I was just up against it and feeling so wild that in my mind, I was like, I wish I didn't have anything, and I didn't really have a lot of support at that time either. I was like, if I had like heroin or something or some kind of strong, I would do anything right now just to not feel what I was feeling, you know?
Yeah.
So from feeling a lot in this breakup and then doing the ceremony, was there did you feel the same, or was there a definite difference after that?
Oh, it was like a night and day, right? Like after the ceremony, there was a lightness. There was, I mean, because what I haven't spoken about was that for me, that experience was so life changing because I always was a person that had a lot of faith. I grew up in a family of medicine people where we always talked about the benevolent spirit of the earth, the nature as an ally. There was always that conversation. And so I knew, like I knew to have faith in something that was bigger than me, that was always looking out for me. But there's a difference between having faith and then actually seeing it with your own eyes.
Right.
Like that ceremony, I remember my dad, it was just me and him, right? And he was like, okay, I'm going to like the first part of the ceremony, like we're going into nature. And I remember just being like so in awe, like and hearing the flowers like give me messages of love and feeling the energies of the tree. And like I was like, oh my God, like I could see these beings are alive and they're like reaching out to me. Like this wasn't like a vision. It wasn't like a hallucination, is what I mean. It wasn't a hallucination. To me, it was like this medicine is enhancing my ability to see reality, right? Which I think is a huge difference. People think that sometimes psychedelics make you hallucinate, right? They give you these visions that aren't there. To me, it's like if you're working in right relationship with these medicines, they're enhancing your ability to see actually the reality that your eyes can't see, but your soul can. Right. So for me, that was like a knowing, because I felt the incredible love and support of this being the earth and all of its, like I remember a pack of crows flew in and I just could feel that they were there for me. Like they were introducing themselves like, we are your friends and we are your guardians. Like we're your spirit animal. And I just knew it. I mean, to this day, the crows are always, whenever I feel sad or something, they'll appear from nowhere. And at that moment, it was just the faith was no longer just faith. It was a deep, profound knowing that I was living in this place of full magic. And so after that experience, I mean, there was no more sadness. I could understand what happened. Like that breakup, I was like, oh yeah, okay. I don't need to be that, like I got it. It's not so heavy anymore, because the source of the pain of the breakup wasn't really that person, right? The source of the pain was like me feeling so unloved. And so when I had this experience of full love from nature, from Mother Earth, it like that breakup just didn't hold the power it was holding before. Like it almost like allowed me to just get some freedom from that heaviness of emotions and be in a state of deep gratitude and connection and knowing.
So was
Mhm.
why were you able to get hooked by that in the first place, do you think? Now, I absolutely empathize with that, right?
Mhm.
Going through a breakup and the parts and the wounds that I have about being isolated, being unloved, right? Or being unlovable, some kind of version of a story like that, and how how much it has shaken me before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think was there in you that was disturbed by that disillusion of that relationship? What was that?
Yeah, well, that led me to other work afterwards, through also other relationships. So, like for me, relationships have been such a catalyst of deep work. And Angela, I think that's why we like connected so much, because that's the
Yeah.
work you've done too. Um, After, a few relationships where I wasn't really being met, um, not just that one, but later on a few others, I realized like, oh wow, like this isn't my, this isn't about the person I am with. This must be about me. Right. And so that journey actually started because after another breakup. And also my dad has been very, very much a inspiration and support system for a while. But I remember I had gone through another breakup, and I was just like devastated. And I would think like for 5 straight days, I stayed at his house. I went back to Mexico, and I wouldn't wake up until like after 12. Like obviously I was going through some deep like depression, and all the stuff was coming up. And he just couldn't handle it anymore. And so I remember one morning he just threw, like he was trying to be funny, but it didn't really work, but he threw a book at me, and I was like, what? And it was Melody Beattie's
Mm,
Codependent No More. And
damn.
he's like, I think you need to read this. And I was like, okay, I'll read it. So I read it, and I remember there was a checklist in the back of that book. And it was like, I think with the exception of like sexual addiction, or right, like everything was like check, 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 check. And I was like, oh my God, I I can name this. It was profound that it wasn't like I'm going crazy, right? Like, because I was feeling like that. Like, what's going on? Once again, like what's wrong with me?
Mm,
But it was like, oh wow, like this is actually something that I can heal because other people have gone through it. I can name it now. And so I started the journey, because one thing about me is that when I know something, I'm like, I go deep, right? I'm like, all right, codependency, let's go. And this is something Angela and I have in common because we've talked about this. And so I went to Mexico City. I was staying with my dad in a smaller town, like 4 hours away from Mexico City. And my dad, he's like, they have a workshop on codependency next weekend. And I was like, oh, okay. So I like went to the 3-day workshop, and like it was an intensive on codependency given by this incredible, like pretty well-known Argentinian therapist. And she just like that was her focus, was codependency. And I learned so much. It was life shifting, also. And also I have to say that that was really like the beginning of my journey as a like as a teacher, facilitator, guide. Because one of the things, I didn't really want to be, I was like the reluctant medicine woman, where like I wasn't obligated to follow the lineage. My dad was very sweet. He was like, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to follow the lineage, right? There was no like hardcore obligation to follow anything. It was more like you do your own path, right? But the doors are open when you want to come back if you want to do this. But for me, it was like, I don't want to be a medicine woman. But it was so interesting to me, like studying about codependency. I was like, oh my God. And then like the whole thing about like studying codependency, and then you study also about the 12 steps. That's one of the ways, right? And And they tell you like if for you to heal codependency, you have to also help others. And I was like, wow, okay, I get it. Like that's when you really know that like you're healing because you can support others in their healing. And that started me off on like, like going to the 12-step program on codependency, reading all of the books on codependency, like almost becoming a codependency expert, right? Um, and deciding like I really love this. Like I love to learn about like what's at source and then how to heal it and then how to help others heal it too, right? I loved it. And I am going to answer your question, Nick, because don't think I forgot. For me,
I forgot.
well, for me, the source was my mother,
Hmm.
Mm.
you know. I grew up in a high like with a mom that was like highly traumatized,
Hmm.
really like what she had to go through in her childhood was horrendous. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But the issue was that, even though my dad was a therapist, like she refused therapy, like or anything that had to do with doing the psychological work, right?
Mm.
And then she ended up marrying my stepdad, who was also a therapist. Isn't that funny? And
Polarity.
and then refused. Like, I mean, seriously, I was like, so I have a father that's a therapist and medicine man, stepdad that's a therapist and college counselor, right? And so I'm like, mom, like around like, I don't know, 17, 18, I'm like, can we please do therapy together? She's like, no, we don't need to do therapy. I'm not going to therapy. I don't need therapy. Classic, right? Like the people that need the therapy the most are the people that reject it the most. And so, yeah, I mean, I had a mom that was so highly traumatized that didn't have the capacity to, you know, get like give me what I needed, like the basic needs. There was a lot of neglect, um, a lot of abuse. I'm grateful it wasn't physical, but a lot of verbal abuse in my home. Um, and it took me a long time. I had to like study a lot around the mother wound to really like besides codependency, also like a lot of personal like and committed research and study around how the mother wound affects me, affects all women that have this really like harmful relationship with traumatized mothers. But that was the source, really, at that time of both
Man,
breakups.
yeah, that's good.
It's so interesting because listening to you talk, when I think about codependent patterns and polarity, it's like as practitioners, we can have the knowledge up here, but not have it embodied. So it's like because of trauma, because of how the psyche is brilliant in secret compartmentalizing our traumas or our wounds to be like, well, you can forget about that, or let's like minimize that, or deny that, or suppress that, or repress that. And just like those kind of dynamics are really interesting, that your dad was a therapist and your stepdad was also a therapist. So on one end you have like super deep like into the work, and yet it's like to have the partner that has that much trauma, it's like like one person is expressing going deep in the work to solve the trauma while the other person is like not doing it, and it's still like a codependent relationship. And then the other the other funny thing is too, when I started studying codependence and like deep diving as well, I started to realize that when you study codependence and you start to help other codependents, if you're not careful, you can just continue to create codependent relationships with those that you're trying to help. So it's almost this weird, like Russian nesting doll of like a cycle of codependence until you actually know how to break that pattern within yourself. So it's a really fun shadow to have and to get to work through. I'll just say that.
For sure. And that's why I like IFS because, well, IFS in conjunction with, work with the sacred mushroom. And I can, my podcast is called Sacred Psychedelics because I really do honor all the different entheogens that we have to work with. But I, what I'm, what I dedicate my life to is mushrooms. So that's what I can talk on. But that like using mushrooms to support you in those kinds of healings and also IFS has been quite effective because what I have found out with like people that are codependent is that like you can heal one part, one codependent part, but then there's another sneaky part, that may show up later on. And you're like, wait, but I already healed it. Why am I still here in this toxic relationship? Or we don't want to say toxic. Let's say in this complicated, harmful relationship, right?
Mhm.
And then that's when I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, there's another part. There's another part that like longs, right? That hasn't been loved, that you thought you had healed one part, but there's another part that still needs your attention. And so that's why I think the work on codependency is evolving too,
Mhm.
right? Because people can go to the other extreme and also be like, I'm an independent woman, I don't need anybody.
Right.
And I feel like I went there too. I went there and it took like doing some work with some mentors where they were like, no, we are human. Like we need each other. Like the the whole thing about like I don't need anybody, that's also trauma response,
Mhm.
Absolutely.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like parts whack-a-mole or codependence whack-a-mole. You like heal one facet of it and then it's like another one shoots up. You get to work, not beat it, but work with it. It's not really whack-a-mole.
Kiss them all.
Kiss, love 'em all, love it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about parts like we do in IFS, and I've done plenty of parts work, and I have like certain characters that I'm fairly familiar with, but then I know that I run into characters that will dart in and dart out quickly, and that I don't have as a intimate relationship or have a lot of information about them. And but I started thinking about like, but there's similarities between all these parts. And so it's like there's like there's like a deeper like Godhead or something. Or so there's like a head or like, I think about the like the wounded child's soul. And but then these sprites come in these different forms in different moments when different energy is present, and they manifest slightly differently. But I think down even another level, it's probably all coming from one place. I don't know if that's a productive thought or not, but
Well, this is what I say, right? It's like for me the most important is the results, right? So the reason why I like parts work is that there are people that go to, you know, like a talk therapy, right? And they're just talking for years and they realize like, wait, this isn't working or it's working, but it's taking like I feel like I've been in this thing for a long time. So it's working at some level, right? But then I had that experience where I remember I went to therapy with a partner that I had that was, you know, he was actually the catalyst of why I started doing codependency work because he was pretty abusive, not physically, but he was abusive. And I couldn't believe that I would be with a person like that. And so, but I convinced him somehow to go to therapy with me. And we went to therapy, it was talk therapy. And she just totally took his side. And I was like, wow, am I going crazy here? Okay. All right. Like this is before my codependency work. And I was like, why do I feel like she just took his side? And and I was like, okay, never mind. Like I don't know what happened here, but I didn't leave like feeling good. But what happened is because we did that session, it somehow gave me permission to stay in the relationship. Like she never said like, hey, this is actually uh abusive behavior, or hey, this is something that like you guys shouldn't treat like the each other like this. Perhaps maybe you shouldn't be together, right? She just wanted to keep on working with us. And I felt like it was like a pressure cooker. You know how pressure cookers, like they have this little hole that lets a little bit of air out, right?
Mhm.
So I felt like that therapy session, because I was ready to leave this relationship, right? I was ready, but I was like, okay, like still want to try this thing called therapy. And going to that therapy session was like a pressure cooker because it gave me permission to stay in the relationship because it made a little hole to let that pressure out until it finally exploded, right? But I think that there's there's ways in that as practitioners or therapists or healers that when we're working with people, to me, I'm always like making sure like, okay, like I want I want a person to have results. I'm not attached to my way. I want to make sure that what I'm using to support them is what is causing results. So
Mhm.
if it's parts work and I'm able to see that I'm 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 supporting them by coming back, into their I know it's called the self, but I like to call it like the spirit-led self.
Mhm.
Like we can once we get to that place, then we can do so much other work. And so sometimes parts work is the work that we do just to get them to a place where they can actually start doing the work because they don't have all these parts that are blocking access.
Right.
And and I know your question about like if is it one or is it, is it many? It's like, I usually just like I try to in the beginning of like a session with someone, I just try to keep it really simple because not everybody has studied IFS like we
Right,
have,
right.
or no one's, or they're not therapists, they're not practitioners. So I just like I'm with them and I my main job is to help them get to their spirit-led self. And so that they notice like, hey, this is really who you are, and you think that this is also who you are, but actually that's a part of who you are, and so we can observe it and also we can work with it. Because the biggest problem when I see somebody that's stuck is that they think that they are this part. They think that
Oh,
they are that,
absolutely.
right? They think that they're this codependent part. Like I am this part. And then
Mm.
this part just takes over and merges the whole, like the system is overwhelmed. And so if I can just keep it really simple and just like, okay, let's make sure that as much as we can, your spirit-led self is here, then, is it one part that is like many different parts? Yeah, could be. Or is it multiple parts? Could be. It's really what works best for the client.
So you just listed like two really big pitfalls or traps that people can encounter in like early work. And one is sometimes when we start working with practitioners, it's like how does someone new to therapy or new to like healing actually know whether a therapist is going to continue to probably poke their pattern or like work in line with that pattern or help to interrupt that pattern? Because when you're trying to like unenmesh from your wounded self or create that space, we don't always have that like familiarity of what's healthy and what's not. And so practitioners that haven't been exposed to their own deeper level of work through parts work or another modality that has helped them to be able to discern the difference between, like you said, spirit-led self or wounded self, then they can show up in sessions as wounded self, try to steer outcomes that it's more about them having consistent client sessions. Like, I want to keep working with these people, so then it becomes about themselves, or telling people you should or should not stay in this situation, or projecting, and then there's transference and countertransference. So it just ends up kind of being, instead of therapy, kind of like a three-ring circus where people are then further traumatized, and then they're like, well, fuck therapy, it just ended up being, worse, or it ended up exacerbating things. But just to clarify, because it kind of sounded like what you were saying is, even though it seemed like she was taking his side, and it didn't feel great, it also simultaneously released some of the pressure that was there. And maybe I'm interpreting this, so I'm trying to understand that it relieved enough pressure from you leaving the relationship so that you stayed in, and then maybe there were additional lessons that you actually got from staying in it when you would have naturally left. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yes and no. So
Mhm.
what I was saying is that after that experience, because having a father who's a therapist, a stepdad who's a therapist, I wasn't um like I didn't have an aversion to therapy, I believe in it. I mean, to this day, there's clients that work with me and they're like, "Oh, but I already have a therapist," or, "Oh, I want to also, I've been thinking about seeing a therapist." I'm like, "Great, the more support, the
Mhm.
better. Like, get your entourage on, right?" So I never say no to additional support if a client has the funds and the time and the energy.
Mhm.
What was very clear to me at that point, and mind you, I'm 46, so I think that like technology, like therapeutic technology has advanced just like anything, right? And what I noticed is that at that time, therapists were not being trained in codependency at all, at all. And that's what happened with this therapist. This therapist hadn't been trained in codependency. Like I would have smelled it. Like if I and that partner of that time would have come to me, I would have been like, red flags. This is you guys are in a codependent situation, which is
Mhm.
not healthy for either of you two. And I would have named it, and if I would have said, you guys have to understand what it is, right? She didn't say any of that.
Mhm.
Right? There was not like there was, and to me it was so obvious, right? And so I know that therapist did not have codependency training. And so after that experience and me doing a lot of like my own education around codependency, I decided that if I was ever going to see another therapist again, I would choose a therapist based on whether they had done work
Mhm.
on codependency. And so I would ask, like, have you done work on codependency? Is this something that you incorporate into your practice? And if they would say yes, then I would go to them and it would be great. It was like therapy was great. They got it, right? And so now, because the second question you had is like, how do you go to a practitioner that, what I heard is like, that keeps their integrity, with you, right? I think that the first thing is like, when I want a practitioner, I look for three things. One, are you trauma informed?
Amen.
Right? Like that's really important.
Yeah.
Trauma informed is number one. Why? Because sometimes you have these therapists that I think now, because my best friend is going into family therapy, for the next 3 years, and I'm looking at some of her books because I'm in her house and I'm sitting in her table, and so far I don't see any trauma books, like
That
straight
shit
up
scares
trauma
me.
books, you
It
know?
literally scares me to know that there are people being trained as therapists or that have been trained, and it does not include polyvagal theory, trauma informed work, codependence, or attachment. To
Or
me,
it's
like foundational. And it's like,
exactly.
and sometimes I'm like, what the fuck are y'all doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, but I want to, like, truly, I'm curious, but I was never curious enough to like go into one of those programs. But when I've met therapists, like, I will ask them too, like, do you know what codependence is? And if they don't, I'm like, good Lord, for the love of God, like, please, like, study it. Like, it'll serve you massively and it'll serve the people that you're serving. Sorry,
Ex-
continue. This is a brilliant
no,
list.
no, I mean, I'm just gonna ditto everything you said, like everything you listed. That's what I would look for in a therapist.
Yeah.
Everything you listed, you know? Um, because I mean, I'm not sure, this is her beginning, right? Like I'm looking at the books and I don't see anything. Like there's like something on bipolar, something on depression,
So, one of my
nothing.
mentors is a therapist, but also trains therapists. He has a couple of treatment centers, and so he trains a lot of therapists of just getting hours. And when I was working with him doing IFS and also somatic experiencing stuff, he was trauma informed. Uh, I was so, I've been sort of a psychology nerd for my whole life, but when we got into this kind of stuff, it was so revelatory for me that to me, it was like, this is a new technology and everybody has to know about it. It's like the first time you use an iPad in bed, you're like, oh my God, this is so awesome. Everybody has to have it. And
That's what
so,
I think about Kindle. Like after dragging my
right.
books from the Bay Area to Mexico in
Yeah,
backpacks, I'm like, never again,
never
Kindle all
again.
the way.
It's the new thing. And so, I asked him about like, we did this stuff and I was like, so this is what you do for a living? You just like, and I was like, this is awesome. And, we started having the conversation. Well, do you think could I do that? And he's like, well, yeah. And he's like, and the fact that you have done this work, you're already into these, puts you, and this was his words, at the 80th percentile.
Yeah.
Because he said the vast majority aren't trained and don't know and have just not, have not been exposed. I think it people's eyes will be open and they'll just be like, oh, okay, when they are exposed and understand. And I kind of see like the nesting dolls. It's like in our unconscious, all of our wounding is sort of our core, and then all of our personality and life is sort of built upon that, And I think codependency is downstream a little bit, but it's close enough to the core that is making those behaviors happen. That it can be, it's pointing in the direction and gets people to start to work with like some really foundational mechanisms that are there. This is like how things go. And I've been looking at a therapy training uh, graduate degree, master's degree, and I looked through their material and there was a little bit, but I mean like this much, right?
No, no. I want to be like, I want to, honestly, I really want to point out and direct people that are looking into being a therapist or anything in that form or a trauma-informed coach to also look at the NICABM, the National Institute of Cognitive and Behavioral Medicine, I believe is what it's called. They have like so many amazing materials and like Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine, and they have so many like experts and they go deep and like it must be one of those things where therapists and coaches, well, coaches that get into the trauma informed world, like clearly, like there's a reason why we've gotten in this deep, you know. But it's like it's going to have to be supplemental, I think, until it's further into the curriculum, because what it seems just from what you were reading, Xochitl, like the books that you're seeing, it seems like it's actually still more geared towards diagnosis and the DSM, and because of how insurance is. So it's like insurance and therapy are enmeshed to the point where it's more about diagnosis and labeling than it is, and medication and things like that, rather than getting to the root of everything that's underlying it. Because if you could get to the root of that, it's kind of like Jenga. You could pull things out at the bottom and everything would topple. But then that doesn't necessarily feed like the capitalist complex. Wait, what are you showing me?
Oh,
I
it's
can't tell.
blurring.
It's the yeah.
Oh, DSM.
Oh yeah, the DSM, right? So then it's like this whole framework is built on identification of illness, or what is considered like dis-ease, or like what's wrong with you, as the way I see it, it's almost like an identity or a label that they're putting on it, when it's like you are misbehaving or your body is misbehaving. And it's like, hold on, what about the intelligence of the human body? What about the intelligence of the psyche and all of the coping strategies and protective mechanisms that are in place for viability, like for survival? Like there's a reason why we have all these different coping strategies and mechanisms. Like codependence exists, narcissism exists, these different things exist as a form of protection. So if you can become compassionate and curious about them, then you can understand that it isn't this like scary thing. It's actually like what you're looking at are psychological developmental phases, emotional maturity, and where people get arrested in development due to trauma. So it's like narcissism, necessary; codependence, necessary; counterdependence, necessary; independence, necessary; interdependence, ideal, and of course, where we all want to go. But we don't get there without traversing through all of these other things and dealing with the origins of where we were arrested in development and why it makes sense and why there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And nothing is a disorder. Everything is actually in perfect order, which is why the human is surviving. They're not thriving, but they're surviving. And we want to get to that thriving place.
My insurance only covers 3 IFS parts, which kind of sucks. So if there's a fourth one, pay out of pocket.
That's a great joke. Xochitl, I know that we need to be wrapping up soon, and I want to pivot a bit. I'm sure you covered this.
Xochitl?
Yes, Esalen. I'm
Is that
faculty
like
at
a cool
Esalen.
place?
It's
bet
such
it's
a
fucking
cool place.
Yes. I haven't been. I would love to go. Yeah, that area is gorgeous.
Big Sur.
Yeah, Big Sur. So this is kind of, if we could spend the next little bit talking about this, and I almost feel like maybe we should have you back for another podcast if you want, but I know that you talk a bit about cultural appropriation of psychedelics, and like, this is a really big question, but I want to just like put it out there. So now that psychedelics are becoming a lot more prevalent, thanks to MAPS and different organizations that are really pushing for the legalization of them, and because they're proving that they work well in with different therapeutic modalities and things. Also with that, humans are humans, and they're going to go, yay! And there's going to be backyard shamans, or people that call themselves practitioners, and they're going to be like, yay! And now I'm going to do a psilocybin retreat in my backyard, and I've been a part of 10, you know. And so it's just like you did such a beautiful breakdown of like what to look for in therapy. Do you have some, I'm sure you have many, but do you have some recommendations for people listening that are interested in accessing plant medicine and doing ceremony, but like how to avoid the pitfalls of maybe just getting excited in the latest wave of what's available and what can be easily available. Because the reason why I'm asking is I know if someone tries to access a deeper level of consciousness or emotion before they have the foundation or the framework to do so, they can end up actually really traumatizing themselves. Or they can become so ungrounded that it can present as mania or paranoia or different things. And if they don't have a steady container or someone that is well versed in what trauma is or how to reground them or work with the psyche in different ways, it can actually handicap them perhaps and create further harm. So I know that was a huge giant question I'm dropping on you.
It's okay. Well, I think the first thing is like I would ask the person that wants to go into doing some sort of psychedelic work is like, okay, so there's two paths usually. Like the first path is, are you doing it under a psychedelic facilitator? Right. And if it's a psychedelic facilitator that's been trained, usually you would go to Oregon, where right now it's legal and there are some centers, right? But Oregon, like to be a psychedelic facilitator that's been trained and that could give psychedelic facilitation, you have to, like, if you're going to do it legally, you would have to be under an institution. So in that way, it protects you because you are under an institution that has like vetted this person and they've, maybe they've only studied for 1 year, right? Because to be a psychedelic facilitator doesn't require anymore that you have been a therapist prior. But there is an organization or an institution that makes sure that things are in order in some way, right? So if you're going to go that route, then you're going to be in a clinical ecosystem where you're probably going to like lay down on a couch, get some, eye masks, and the person will play some beautiful music, and you'll have your journey. And then maybe afterwards, or not maybe, but most likely you'll do some integration. So if that's the way, I say great, you know, wonderful. Like at least there is some type of accountability, right? Like this psychedelic facilitator is accountable to an institution. And some people are like, no, they're against institutions. But I'm like, well, like this institution, if anything happens to you, they're responsible for you, right? With medicine work that is being done by medicine people, I think what's important is when you want to do a high dose psychedelic journey of some sort with a medicine person or a person that calls themselves a medicine person, um, I would approach it as if you were about to get open heart surgery or brain surgery. That's how I personally would approach it.
Yeah.
So if I'm about to get open heart surgery, my father has had open heart surgery and my partner's mother just had open heart surgery last month. So the way that we approach looking for a doctor that will perform open heart surgery for you is like we're making sure that this doctor, like we're looking at their experience, and to be a doctor, it takes at least like 7 years, and that's just the school part. That's just the study part. And then 3 years residency. That's 10 years until you get to perform your first surgery by yourself. And I'm sure even at that time, there's somebody looking over you. Right. And then for you to like, for you, like, I don't really want somebody that's just coming out of residency if I'm going to get my heart and like ribs sawed open and my heart, because that's what they do. They saw your ribs open, they open, and then they open your heart and they have to kind of it's a complicated surgery, right? I want somebody that's been operating hearts like beyond their 10 years of schooling and residency. I really want somebody that's been doing it for at least 10 years successfully. Like they haven't gotten kicked out of their uh hospital and they have a high success rate. right? So
Yeah.
usually when you go to a surgeon, this surgeon has had minimum 25% of their life where they've studied and now they're ready to practice. So, like, let's just say if you're 20, that means that you studied since you were 15, right? And you've studied for 5 years and you're not yet ready to serve medicine. That's just your study. Now you're going to start serving medicine with the big person that you've been apprenticing under. And
Mhm.
so now you probably won't even get to do your first ceremony until maybe when you're 30, right? So here we have these, I call them Insta shamans because they're like instant and also they're big on Instagram.
Huh?
That, they spend 2 weeks in Peru and they do some kind of course of some sort, mostly given by another white-bodied person that's not of that indigenous lineage. And they
Mhm.
return home either to US and Europe and they are like, I got, the medicine told me that I can serve it. Or like, who wants me to, serve the medicine? And like, this is really dangerous. And
Mhm.
the reason is why it's so dangerous is because just like what you talked about, like they don't have the foundation to even like a lot of these people aren't even doing an intake. Like if somebody wants to come do a high dose ceremony, legal
Right.
ceremony with me to Mexico, you have to fill up an intake that sometimes people have said like it took me like an hour. And I'm like,
Right.
great. Like people know they have to do an intake with me. Right. And then they do an interview
Mhm.
with me. And then I decide whether they're like healthy, psychologically healthy, physically healthy, and just, you know, like available for this type of work. Um, People aren't doing that.
Right.
Those backyard shamans, they're not doing that. And so just one more piece, the danger of that is not just that they don't have the foundation to keep somebody safe because they haven't even done an intake. But the next thing is that what a lot of these psychedelic facilitation schools are not talking about, which every time I get invited, I like mention it a little bit,
Mhm.
is that you're opening portals. And when dealing with these medicines, you are also dealing with entities. And nobody wants to talk about that, but you have to.
Yeah.
Nobody want like there's no psychedelic training that's talking about that. I guarantee it because they've all like I've had talks with them and nobody's talking about that. And I
Mhm.
think that this is important to talk about.
Mhm.
My
Yeah.
first open heart surgery was on my buddy's couch, and I was the surgeon, and I cannot recommend it.
So I love that you went through all of that and created some context for how serious it is, just because when you have a practitioner that doesn't have the experience or foundation, when you start to unlock secret compartments in others' psyches, like there can be entities there. Like if anyone's interested in just like dipping their toes in, watch the documentary The Way of the Psychonaut with Stan Groff. Like he talks about encountering like entities and or aspects of people's personalities that come across as such. So if you don't have, you kind of have to have a strong constitution or have the ability to know how to hold space and also stay grounded in one of those situations. But the other thing too is like you're literally opening people up. You're opening them up in many different ways. And if you don't have the foundation to hold them through that, if they don't have the foundation to also be able to ground themselves to some degree, um, you can open them up and then it's like sending someone back out into the world when they've had surgery and they're not closed up and they're still bleeding. And then it's like, oh, I got my money, I did my container, and now there you go. And that can be incredibly dangerous too for that person and others that they encounter, depending on what happens. So it's like, I think as humans, like it's so normal to just be like, yeah, this thing's fun. Like, let me just like fuck around with it. But you know, sometimes you fuck around and find out, and it's not so great. And unfortunately, a lot of people get early initiations with these different medicines, and it's not good for them. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I figured I knew you would have a lot to say, and I feel like there's so much to talk about.
Oh
I
yeah,
wanted I
there's a
wanted to
lot more.
talk to you about the energies out there, right? Because what that's a whole thing. Damn it.
I mean, I know that's a whole, well, just because we started the subject, I will define it because I think that people are like, oh, they're going to close with this topic and I want more. So I'll just say this. There's two types of entities that I have learned about and experienced. The first one is condensed, I call it condensed emotion, which is like when you, and what this, the name of this podcast, right? So emotional. It's like when you haven't worked through certain emotional things and you've been keeping that emotion so down deep that in a medicine journey, it wants to come out. And so one of the ways that it comes out is that it's like this condensed emotion and it takes a form, right?
Mhm.
Because you need to see it sometimes, not all the time. You don't always need to see it, but sometimes for your own healing, you need to see it. It has eyes, it looks ugly or whatever, however, it's manifesting itself. And you can start doing that work with it to liberate it, right? So that it's like goes back into the love. So in that way, when we have those kind of entities that are a compressed emotion, like I'm so down to work with them. Like, okay, let's go. Let's do that work.
Mhm.
But then there's other entities that are not condensed emotion. And this is what I have noticed. And that's why I'm really clear about my retreats. I'm like, we do not work with addiction, because some people are like, well, I've heard that this medicine is really good for addiction. And I'm like, yeah, but like, number one, that's not my specialty. And
Mhm.
number two, like when you work with medicines but I will be more specific, right? Because the medicine I work with is the sacred mushroom. If somebody comes with an addiction, like they're like 100% they will have an entity. Like the addiction is a sure sign that there's an entity. And these are energies that like because why do we have addiction? It's a trauma, right? Like there's the wisdom of the body, like that's the way it survived. But the thing is that it used this substance to survive, and the substance is at such a low vibration that you open yourself up to energies that are low vibration too.
Mhm.
And so when we have to work with that, it's a little bit more difficult. I mean, we've done it before, but it's not something that I personally want to do, especially because my specialty is not addiction. So
Yeah.
that's why I always tell like this is not a retreat for people that want to heal addiction. And
Mhm.
and if people write, we ask like, have you had any addictions? How long have we don't take anybody with any like 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 if somebody comes with like codependency, obviously like because I have a level of expertise with that,
Mhm.
they're welcome into the retreat. But let's say somebody comes that they've been like alcoholic, like I ask, well, like how long have you been sober? Right. And if it's more than 5 years, I'm like, okay, great. Come on in. Right. But if it's somebody that's like in like they are right now an alcoholic, like this is not the retreat for you.
Mhm.
Right. Like even if you've been sober from meth and like the heavy like heroin, like those people, like you cannot come to my retreat, because that's like you need somebody that specifically works with these type of
Yeah.
addictions and entities. um so I hope that helps just to clarify a little bit.
It does.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Oh. So wrapping up, I do feel like we'll need to have another podcast because there's so much to talk about. But if you have any programs, I know you have some magic medicine journeys coming up. So if you want to share more about whatever you have coming up at Esalen, or this is the place to drop it. Yeah, let's
Thank
talk
you
about
so much.
your offerings.
Yeah, I have a journey coming up next month. It's still there's some spaces still left, which usually we're already sold out, but some lucky people who want to come can join. And we have also a New Year's retreat. And due to the just my schedule, because I've been doing a lot of online teaching and also I teach at Esalen Institute, and just my schedule is really tight. I might not do retreats for at least a year. So if you have wanted to do a retreat that's legal, that's safe, trauma informed, which I think is really important also in medicine work, because a lot of medicine people, even indigenous medicine people, are not trauma informed. And I have big conversations about how that's like needed even in our space as indigenous medicine people. Um, so yeah, I'm inviting everyone, if you really feel called to do a trauma informed indigenous traditional psilocybin retreat, now is your chance, because I'm not sure if we're going to be doing retreats next year. And we are the only indigenous woman owned psilocybin retreat in the world. So
Yay, wow.
Cool.
yeah, come
And
join.
I've seen your website and shared it before, and I'm happy to share it again on Instagram. But like, it
Um,
always looks so magical because you have it, isn't it in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico?
yes, San Miguel de Allende.
Yeah, it's the website and your itinerary always looks so amazing and beautiful. And so we'll put that link below. Anything else you want to share? Maybe going on at Esalen, upcoming talks?
No, we're pretty much done for the year. Yeah, just if you're interested in my work, I mean, I do have online programs throughout the year. So just join my email list and social media and all of that good stuff. Stay connected.
Okay,
Amen.
great. Yes, and y'all can also, like I mentioned at the beginning, catch Xochitl's podcast, Sacred Psychedelics, on Apple and Spotify. And I've checked out a couple episodes so far,
Mm,
dipping my toes in. I absolutely loved your episode with East Forest. It was
mm.
very beautiful. And you're so vulnerable and open in what you were sharing. And I was like, oh, so chill, so sweet. So I really was listening to that.
Um,
Yeah.
Well, what an honor to be here with both of you. This was like really super fun. And I have to say that I've been a guest in many podcasts, but you guys really like had me talking about some of the things that I don't talk about in interviews. So good interviewers are
We're down in
so,
the shit.
yeah, you guys have an amazing podcast.
Thank
Well,
you
thank you.
so much.
Thanks for coming on, Xochitl. It was
Yeah.
great to have you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
emotional with Xochitl. We're gonna call that a wrap. We'll see you on the other side.
Bye.
Later, guys.